Welcome to Jbrc Race Cars. I'm Bud Payton, one of the fabricators here at Chevies, and today we're going to be going over 55 Chevies. We have 3 different type of builds going on in the shop right now. 2 of the builds are on our major tables, and 1 is a rebuild. Let's go take a look and see what kind of differences there are in these type of cars. The first car we're going to talk about is this 55 Chevy here. It's a steel bodied car, steel roof, steel quarters. Steel rockers. The doors on it are carbon fiber. The front end's carbon fiber. Even though it's still going to be kind of a heavyish car, this guy wants a lot of lightweight components on it. There's going to be a lot of titanium components on this car here. It's going to be a street car-ish. The rocker heights are a little bit higher on this car in relation to some of the pro cars that we build because of ground clearance on the street. This is going to be a big block Chevy, twin turboed, small tire type car. It has dual funny car cages, well, funny car cage and a half. It's got more of a half funny car cage on this side. Double frame rail car, 110 to 112 inch wheelbase. It has 2 inches of stagger built into it, which is standard for us. This wheel opening is the factory wheel opening. It naturally has to be modified, but it's going to end up being cut several inches higher, several inches wider. The back of the car here, the 55 Chevys have a real long overhang in the back of the car, and which you have to make a wheelie bar slot quite high in the back of these cars. It hasn't been cut in this one yet. This one here, the deck lid, the way it fits in there, you have to come in here with steel lips all the way around and flush it out for flanges to mount the deck lid. This one's going to have a fully removable deck lid to where the whole deck lid comes off top and bottom for access to the center of the back of the vehicle. This car is going to have a full dash with a race pack instrumentation in it. As you can see here, whenever the door closes on a car like this, this is what we call the airtight seal up, which is a fire blocker to keep any kind of fire from going back through the car. This car will also have a full belly pan underneath the car for aerodynamics, but yet on the inside of the car it'll have a full complete tunnel over the top of the double frame rail to be able to seal to the inside of the car, so none of the outside smoke and debris can get inside the car. One of the good things about the 55 Chevys is there is plenty of room for a driver. If you're a large driver, this may be your car. Leg room is no problem at all. The seat configuration is set way back in the car. As a matter of fact, on these cars, we have to add an additional bar, usually across the roof up here, to put your switch panel on, because when you're buckled back into the seat, you can't reach all the way to the front eyebrow bar in most cars. So we have to bring another bar back to bring the switch panel back to where the driver can reach it. One of the things we found on these 55 Chevys is when you order a standard door, if they build the door off of factory molds, which a lot of the race car shops do, the fulcrum point on the front of the door is in line with the front edge of the door. And what that does is the factory brackets on a factory car, whenever the door opens, it swings straight out, and that gives it the ability to clear the fender. But in the drag race configuration, when we use door pins so you can take the door on and off, we have to extend the front of the door forward about 1.25 inches. And what that does is when you open the door, since the pivot point is now behind the front lip of the door, as soon as you open the door, it goes inward and it doesn't crash into the fender. Now, you guys that are getting these doors and not adding to the front and using a hinge system like this, you're going to run into problems where the front of the door crashes into the fender. So a simple fix is simply add to the front of the door. You can add to the front of the door and take that length off of the front end to compensate for it. This particular car, being a turbo car, it doesn't use a hood scoop. What we do is we put a cowl on it. The cowl goes right above the intake manifold, and it gives the driver good visibility and better aerodynamics. All turbo cars are side exit. What we'll end up doing here is the bottom part of the fender will be cut off. It will stay on the car, and the turbo dump will be mounted into the bottom of the fender. What we also do at the top, at the hood line where it meets the windshield, a lot of times we'll create a flange, and it just makes a lot better seal to the windshield. This will all be body worked in. This car also has a titanium front end mount to accent the carbon front end, trying to keep everything light as possible. The second car we're going to take a look at today is 55 Chevy. It is a fiberglass body built by a local St. Louis builder here. Top sportsman car. This car here, the roof is a lot shorter than the steel body car. It's about 2 inches lower. This car has rockers. We don't put a steel rocker on this car. We're using the rockers that are built into the body. The rocker heights on this car are a little bit shorter, 3.5 front and rear. This car will take a 34.5 tire with a 39-inch tub in it. In relation to the other car, it is a small tire car. Even though this is a fiberglass car, it's still a heavy car. Whenever you mount a heavy body, a couple of things you got to do is on your body mounts. On a carbon fiber body car, we would probably just use a single tube out there, but since it's such a heavy car, we triangulate and put a gusset just off almost all the body mounts. In a fiberglass car and a steel body car, a lot of the tubing sizes will be different, and then the tubing wall thicknesses will be different also. In the heavier cars, we use 058 tubing, sometimes 065. In the lightweight cars with carbon fiber bodies, you can use smaller tubing, 035, 049, and so on. This wheel opening here has been modified. We moved it up 3 inches. This car uses a 34.5 tire, which is a pretty good sized tire, but this will allow a lot more ease in getting the tire on and off of the car by raising it up. If you take a look here in the back of the car, earlier on the steel body car, I mentioned that a wheelie bar slot had to be put in there. And this is kind of what it looks like. It's a huge wheelie bar slot, and that's the reason why, is because there's so much rear overhang on these 55s. Also too, on these 55 Chevys, since the distance from the rear axle center line to the back of the bumper is so far, whenever this car leaves the starting line, they really squat in the back pretty hard, and it can cause a situation where this bumper hits the ground. So usually about 3 to 3.5 inch minimum rocker on these cars is all we do. On the 55 Chevy, what I mentioned on the first car, on a factory configuration, the front of the door is very short. It's about right there. This particular builder of this body has already extended the front of the door, and I'll show you the reason why here. With the front of the door extended, as soon as you open it, it goes in and away from the fender. And that's because the fulcrum point is back here. If the fulcrum point was farther forward and we didn't add to the front of the door, as soon as you open it up, this would go forward and crush into the fender. So if you have any problems like that on these 55 Chevys, extend the front of the door and that will correct the problem for you. When swinging doors on a 55, or any body, I guess you could say, you want to keep your hinges separated as far as you can. That way, if you got a heavy door, the wider stance you got, the more power you got to be able to hold the door correctly in place. Another thing is when you're hanging the door post, the top post should always be in plumb with the bottom post. That makes the door open and swing correctly. If they're not in plumb, your door may naturally swing up, or it may naturally swing down if they're not in plumb. Again, this is the second car, the fiberglass car, and we're looking at the seating area. This car does not have the pedals or the steering column installed in it yet, but as you can tell, there is plenty of room in these cars for long-legged people, big people, and so on. One of the issues we have found with the 55 Chevy is front overhang. From the center line of the axle, center line of the front axle to the front of the nose is 45 inches on all competitive cars. The 55 Chevy is 8 inches shorter than the 45 inches. So what we do, and that's all built into the body, there's really no way to extend this thing out anymore without moving the wheel openings, and a lot of work. So what we'll do is we'll put a splitter on the front of the car that will extend out, and it'll be tall enough to where it will trip the lights on the front end of the track and still trick the lights into thinking it has a 45-inch overhang. That way it's on the same page as the rest of the competitive cars that are out there. On the heavier cars, the steel body cars and the fiberglass cars, we do use more body tubes, heavier tubing, thicker wall tubing. On each side, the body tubes in the back of the car here, there's 4 body tubes per side, and a lot more body mounts just throughout the whole car. It's just the typical physics of a heavier body, you have to have more mounting points and a heavier structure to mount. By having the door hinges in plumb, top to bottom, the good thing about that is when you open the door, it pretty much stays in place. It doesn't go anywhere. If the door hinges are not in plumb, you could have a situation where you're trying to get into the car and the door is constantly trying to either close on you or it's trying to go away from you. You don't want that situation. It's easy to make them in plumb, and then you'll have a nice, steady, stable door. The last car we're looking at here is a 55 Chevy. It is a Pro Mod mountain motor nitrous car. This is an older car. It's got quite a few runs on it. It just came into the shop recently after having a mishap on a racetrack. It had a couple of connecting rods inside the engine containment bucket. Then it had a mishap after that. Regardless to say, it needs a new front end and a new pair of doors. It has a carbon front end, carbon doors. In this particular build, back in the day, the bodies were wider, so what we had to do on this particular front end is widen the front end to get it to fit this older body style. And that's what we're in the process of now. Also on this car, as we mentioned on the first build, the carbon fiber doors that were built for it had this short overhang in the front. So as you can see here, we've had to add on to the front of the doors, just like we did on the first build, to be able to get the pivot points swinging correctly to fit the front end. Like we talked about in the other builds, the fiberglass car had a lot more structure, a lot more pinpoints in this area of the car. Since this is a carbon fiber build, this car has a minimum weight. It has to weigh 24, 25 with the driver in it. So we back off on the body mounting tubes. As you can see in this car, it has a single 3/8 pin coming out holding a quarter, and then nothing else until it gets down to the bottom of the rocker. Because of the structure of the car, the actual carbon body itself is quite strong itself, and we need to keep it lightweight, so it's less tubing, lighter weight. Okay, there you have it. We have 3 55 Chevys we looked at today. 2 are new builds on our main tables, and 1 is a rebuild. I'm really glad that Jerry's letting us take this time and do these videos to show you people what we're faced with on a daily basis here in the shop. I've been a fabricator here for quite some time, almost 30 years, and it's really nice to let people see what we deal with on a daily basis. If you guys have any questions, feel free to get a hold of us.